All right. So, Monica,
Yes,
it's nice to see you.
nice to see you too.
So, first of all, before we start, just say a little bit about yourself, your name, where you work, and so on,
Okay, my name is
please.
Monica Mika. I am the director for Centennial Area Health Education Center, which is a mouthful. And we are one of 6 area health education centers working in Colorado. And our area and mission is Northeast Colorado. We serve the 11 counties.
And you've been with CAHEC for how long now?
For 7 years.
Mhm.
And our mission is to do health education and workforce development with an eye on underserved areas and rural areas. And we do that in a number of different ways. We work with high school students all the way to practitioners to try to encourage them to stay working in rural communities in healthcare.
And you're a rural gal yourself. You grew up around here, and you're married to a veterinary.
That is true. I'm about as rural as they come, and in order to show that, I usually have dirt under my fingernails and cowboy boots on.
You wanna show us?
Yeah, so here you go. There you go.
And by the way, your husband Ted has been one of our interviewees too. So for cross-reference, that may turn out to be interesting sometime. Well, let me say I've been involved with CAHEC on and off for years and years, and I'm on the board now. And this project was your idea. And I'll never stop admiring you for thinking of this. Want to say how the idea came to you?
So early on in February, when we started hearing about COVID and people were really concerned about it, a lot of my friends and colleagues started calling and having stories and were sharing their experiences. And as it became more and more a thing or something that we were being confronted with, I found that these stories were really enriching. And maybe the stories were a little bit different than what we were hearing on TV. And I thought, what would happen if we memorialize these? That we create an oral history of people who were really impacted, and to allow the future generations to decide what really happened and what people were thinking. And we just started by doing what we normally do in rural communities and sit down with a cup of coffee and talk and share. Yeah, exactly. And I just thought, what a gift to give the world. A different point of view, perhaps, than what they're hearing. That's how, it's that simple.
And there were organizational reasons too for choosing this project, weren't there?
There were a couple different reasons. It seemed like the rural community, their voice wasn't necessarily being heard when we were talking about what is going on with COVID, and even more so in some places in Colorado that still don't have COVID cases. And so it really started being an opportunity for different organizations to tell their stories, and also to make sure that we were reaching people who needed to be reached, and organizations who needed to know that somebody cared about them. They wanted to hear what they had to say.
And didn't you also have staff you needed to redeploy?
Yes, that was also another part of this, was that because many of us in CAHEC are health educators, many far better than myself, they had programs scheduled all throughout North and Northeast Colorado that immediately got canceled. And instead of just sitting around saying, what are we going to do? We sat down and said, well, what resources do we have? What resources do people who attend our meetings or who are our colleagues, what do they have? Why don't we just start Zooming? And all of a sudden, our calendars that were blank overnight got filled with engaging conversations with people. And it was just neat to see. I mean, we actually completely switched our product and what we were going to deliver overnight to a different platform.
And from the outside, I can see the staff has really picked up and run with this.
They have. At first, they were reluctant. They were like, "Are you kidding me? It's one more thing, a time of crisis," because it was a change. Because all of a sudden, they were really comfortable doing their programs. That they couldn't do them, they were down in the dumps. And the easy way out would have just been, well, let's just wait and see. But instead, it was, well, maybe dig a little deeper and do something you're not comfortable with. Yeah. And I'm sure our first interviews, I know mine were, the IT was rocky at best, but we learned through this. Staff I really think this stretched them. Just let them know that in time of crisis, use it. Use it to allow yourself to grow and change. And I can tell you that staff is far more comfortable Zooming. They're far more comfortable reaching out and having this type of dialogue, and so is the rest of the world. And so really, I think it really helped us stay in pace with where I think future education is going to
go. This is a question that probably should save for later, but it's just come right up. So I'll ask you now. How has this changed you? What have you learned from doing this?
I've learned that I really need to be far more present when I'm doing Zoom meetings, and to take the dialogue, even though it's very different and it's not accustomed to my culture, because my culture is I want to I'm rural. I want to touch you and hug you and use my hands. It has really encouraged me to listen and to be more present and do that without what feels comfortable to me. And it's made me more proficient on the computer, definitely.
Yeah. Now you've just reopened the office in the last couple of weeks, haven't you?
We have, and we're transitioning in. And I think that this is also something that I've learned, that being a leader, you have to be out in front of your group, but you can't be so far ahead of them that they either, one, don't follow you, or two, they're not comfortable. And I have staff members who really are worried about getting COVID, very concerned about what it might do to them and their families. And my personal opinion is, well, let me just get it and move forward. But as a leader, I have to say, what's making you comfortable? And then we have to decide what's going to be comfortable for our group. So normally I would have said, okay, well, the governor opened up, we can just go back to work. But we're not doing that. We're phasing in, and we're being really mindful. If people are interested in wearing masks, then we'll wear masks. If they want to forego masks, then that's okay too. But we're social separating. You know, we have a large building. We can be here without being concerned about being too close. But it has been really hard. And I think it's not so much the transition, but overarching change. So we were here in the office, and then we changed because of COVID, and we went to our individual houses, and then we had to learn how to connect and how to work together. And I think we did a really good job. And just when we became proficient at that, we're changing. And now we're going back to our old way of doing things. And I think the trick is, how do you go back and carry with you the lessons that you've learned to be better?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take us a little while.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like those lessons are around listening.
Listening, and Zoom is one of those tools that allows you to be there,
Mm-hmm.
look like you're listening, but not be engaging.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's disingenuous. That makes somebody think that you are engaging and you're hearing what they're having to say. And I have to say that before COVID, I did that too often, that I didn't use this format to fully engage with people. We have long meetings through different universities where you'd be in a 3-hour Zoom meeting. Oh, I'd be on the side returning emails or looking at my calendar. And I really tried to make the effort when I am in Zoom to just be here.
Even for 3 hours?
Oh yeah. Some of the directors' meetings go on and on and on, and it's very. There's a sense of fatigue, Zoom fatigue. I'm sure somebody will say it's something real, but if you're really listening, it's hard.
Well, one of my middle child, Jack, is a psychotherapist or a therapist in Seattle, and he has his own practice. And he switched completely to video a few months ago. And Seattle, of course, was an early site for the infection. And he didn't lose any of his clients when he did this. So he's seeing however many he sees a week. And he's talked this over with his colleagues too, and says that they're actually more, even though now he doesn't have that commute, but with the same number of clients and the same amount of work, it's harder. He's more fatigued because he's not getting back just what you get from being in the same room with a person.
Mm-hmm. And on a much smaller scale, when we started these interviews, first day I scheduled like 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not realize how exhausting it was.
Mm-hmm.
That it took so much more effort to be present, and not only to listen, but I'm looking for cues. That whole rural thing where we shake our head, we flip our hair, we do all this stuff, and it misses its translation when we're both like two-dimensional. And so I would agree. Just the fatigue of it has been challenging. I don't do 3 anymore. Just, and other staff members, and I'm sure you've experienced too, that it takes a lot out of you listening to people's stories.
Yeah. So you pace it. What else do you do and we get together now, who've been doing the interviews, we get together once a week and talk about it and how it's going and how our lives are going. What other ways do you have to maintain during this time?
Into the future?
To maintain your equilibrium in the face of this.
For this project, I think sometimes I'll take dumb luck over well planning and data. We set it up so that it's a team effort. And that's been really helpful, that I don't think anyone has felt too individually overwhelmed, and you knew that other people were there in case you needed someone to do interviews. And so for that team effort, I think that's been really helpful. Through the whole COVID experience, you know, I'm a person of faith, and I've really looked at this as an opportunity to see how can I grow as a person, and to also confront some things that maybe aren't the best, some things that I didn't know about myself that I need to change and to be willing to look at. And I have an amazing family structure and support there. So I think that gives me my faith and my family, give me the foundation that, yeah, I'm not happy that my pool's been closed for 3 months and I haven't been able to swim. And I'm not happy that things have changed, but I really have the belief that it's going to be okay. And that we will come out on the right side of all of this. And it's going to be different, and we're going to have to be willing to look at that. And I'm also real fortunate that I don't have young children, that I have adult children, and they're making their own decision about what's going on in the world. And I don't have to help them with that. And so I think that would be really hard if you were a mom or dad and you had little kids and they were seeing these riots and they were stuck at home and couldn't do what they normally did. I didn't have that. I had supportive husband, adult sons, and it was a good time for me to look at things to say, okay, how can I be the best Monica possible? And, you know, we get lazy with ourselves at times. And just little gentle reminders that the world's bigger than ourselves and that we're all going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, this has certainly been a time for going inward, both as individuals and I believe as a culture.
Yeah. I always think if somebody was standing outside watching this, I don't know, from afar, what would they think about us? What would they think about this human race? That I think some of the reason that we're seeing all the riots and the protest is, yes, the system's broken, but I think people were so stressed and so far removed from what was normal to them that we've just pushed, as a society, we've just pushed people so far that, you know, you're a physician. What happens when you push people? They react. So that's what I think we're doing. We're reacting.
Yeah. So let's talk about the interviews you've done. How many have you done now?
I don't know. Maybe 20 so far. Yeah. And my youngest interviewee was a 5-year-old boy whose mom is a dental hygienist. And he was very upset because his whole summer was messed up. And he was just one wrestling match away from becoming like the mini wrestler in the state of Colorado. He was just devastated because he wouldn't have the opportunity to do that. And he was also a little worried about girls. And he told me in his interview. At 5? Well, he told me in his interview, I said, so do you think girls are cuter online or in person? and he said, I think it's probably just about the same both ways. It just was super cute. So that was a fun interview. And most every interview, well, let me say all interviews have been very thoughtful and people shared their thoughts. I found in all of them nuggets, these like nuggets of beauty and expression. And throughout all of them, and it would be really hard to choose which one. But what I found interesting is the themes of resilience, humanity, understanding, and non-judgmental ways. And so that's different than what I'm seeing reflected or acted out versus what people said. And then people also were able to do what they needed to do. The ability for humans to move forward in times of adversities, I think, is really reflected in the stories that they shared. One story that touched me recently was from an ICU nurse, a rural nurse, and I asked her, if you're a rural nurse and you've been in the ICU, so what's the big deal? You're trained to watch people die. You're trained to engage with them. And her response was something I hadn't really thought about. And her response was that while her hospital didn't have a policy, she had a personal policy that nobody should die alone. And as a nurse and a caregiver, she wanted to be there. She wanted to be there for her patients. And she had 3 times as many patients as she normally did. And that holding a cell phone up to a dying person so their family could hear their last breath just was agony. That of all things was something. And that really, I guess I haven't seen that story told. Seen the intensity and that the death and dying stories were really touching.
Well, yeah, and again, all these people who are dying without family and how it affects the families is really, really hard. How old is the oldest person you've interviewed?
Well, since I didn't ask, I'm just going to have to tell you I'm profiling. I think probably
approximately, yeah.
Yeah, I was in the 70s, and nobody I interviewed expressed personal concern about themselves in relationship to COVID. Not one of them said that. Yeah. They all said they were worried about their family and their communities. However they defined their community, it was not about them personally. It was about what's happening beyond themselves.
I've had the experience with the interviews that I've done. I've felt that it's as meaningful for the person who's telling their story as it is for us. That it's a great opportunity for them to kind of stop and be heard themselves.
I've had that same experience where one nurse said, just in the middle of our interview, she stopped and said, "Thank you. You were the first person to ask me how I'm doing." And it was, you could just see, it was so cathartic, and wow, what a great unintended outcome for something that we chose to do because we wanted to save the story, and maybe the story is saving the people.
I agree, I think that's one of the reasons why I know that's one of the reasons why I keep doing this. And I said this years. I almost always get back at least as much as I give, and in terms of how and that's how this is too. We get plenty back, whether or not the person stops and says thank you. We know, you can tell.
You can tell.
So here's a hard question, which I'm used to asking hard questions. what would you like to say? What would you like to be heard about? What would you like to say? Is there something we haven't talked about yet that it would feel good to get off your chest, or just to tell about, or a story or something?
Here's a story. I think as a society, we're really good about handling tragedy if it happens in one place. And we know how to respond in an emergency management fashion. You know, oh, there's a tornado here, there's flood here. But we've really struggled in dealing with tragedy across all sectors and across cultures and across family and across municipalities. And I live in an area where the governor has a set of rules, the city has a set of rules, and the county has a set of rules, all three of which contradict each other. And I think that's sad. I think that shows a failure of leadership. I think it shows a failure of community design. And it most affects people who don't have access to resources or aren't aware of what the political systems are. Not even about Republican and Democrat. It's like, what message are we giving people? And is this event going to be memorialized in our history as the time that we couldn't come up with a unified message? That there wasn't any one authority? I mean, that to me, I think is sad. And it's sad to see that some places you go and across the street, if you go there, you need a mask. Across the street, you don't need a mask. It like marginalizes those people who are doing one thing versus another. And I think that that's sad when public policy results in such confusion.
What are your thoughts, hopes, fantasies about how these videos are going to be used?
That's a really good question. And I don't know. At first, I thought we'll archive them and we'll keep them safe. That's the best thing we can do for history is we'll keep these stories and this oral history safe. And I struggle with now, how do you share it? And how do you do so that it memorializes the stories? And I've seen some great work done on PBS with little projects like this. I don't know. I really think that it's the group's going to need to come together and really figure out not how do we use the stories, but how do we honor the stories. And that was a lot of these people are my friends, and they sat down in times of crisis when they didn't have time just to talk to me so we could record it. And my promise to them was we wouldn't do anything until we had something very worthwhile and productive to do with them. So I don't know what that looks like. I'm interested in hearing thoughts from people who have skill sets that I don't have, and in a way to present this differently. I don't want them to just die and just, be a research project, because I think that they're rich, and I think that people need to hear these stories, but I don't know when they need to hear them. I think that sometimes you need to pace yourself, and when that is, I don't know. I think you were the one that told me last week that never make a big decision like for a whole year. If you get divorced, wait a year. So I don't know. I mean, but I do think that having the right time in all of this is is something we need. Initially, I thought, well, a year from now is our nurse educator conference. And because we skipped our 30th, that this would be a great way of being able to have a product to share at the conference.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, I don't even know if we're going to have a 2021 conference.
Yeah, nobody knows.
You know, so
anything.
yeah, we just weekend heard from CSU that they're cutting all of their travel for 2021. So if every university becomes in alignment with that, we're not just looking at cutting our 2020 conference, but our 2021 would likely be impacted too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we just need to, what can we do with them? I mean, I've learned, it needs to be useful,
Mm-hmm.
whatever we end up doing.
And what's good is this stuff will keep. Electrons don't deteriorate, assuming we find a good place to keep them, some cloud somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But we don't want it to be like cassette tapes. We don't want VCRs. I mean, yeah, remember those tapes? Yeah, we don't want that. But something meaningful.
Yeah.
And we will be presented, I'm 100% sure we will be presented with an amazing alternative or option, and we'll just know that's the right one to do.
Yeah. Well, you're interviewing me in 2 days.
Yeah.
And I have lots of thoughts about that, so don't forget to ask me the question.
Okay. I will ask you that one.
Yeah, good. It's been terrific working on this project, and as always, it's great working with you and with the staff. You have such a good staff.
Mm-hmm.
So
they're really talented and they're passionate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons making sure that we do this transition right is so important, because they are stressed and their lives are all in different places. Yeah. And many of them are dealing with things I don't have to deal with, real big stressors. And so helping move them in a comfortable fashion is, I believe, the challenge of all supervisors getting their staffs to go back. But understanding why they're so stressed, I may not be able to relate to it because their lives are different, but I sure as heck better try to understand it.
Yeah, well, I'm predicting that reintegrating in general is going to be harder than the sequestering was. Mm-hmm. It's like the difference between fasting and trying to control your eating for 24 hours. Mm-hmm. When you're fasting, you just don't eat. You know the answer. When you're trying to control your eating and there's chocolate cake, that's a different matter.
Well, people are angry. I mean, truly angry. And anger takes a while to work through, mm-hmm. just in general.
Mm-hmm. What's the anger? What do you think it is? It's lost opportunity? Now, the healthcare workers we've talked to haven't lost many opportunities. They've had plenty to do. But
I think maybe not so much just the healthcare workers, just the overall norm of what's going on. I mean, at Facebook, we're so divided on this or that. And, that's when you're constantly hearing that and over again in the media and you're seeing this, it does affect you personally. Mm-hmm. I've been in meetings where people have not been at their best. Mm-hmm. And I've worked with some of these people for 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I've been in meetings to see them go off on something that mm-hmm. I would guarantee you in the normal environment wouldn't even be an issue. Some little mispronunciation of someone's name became something very important to that person, and no one in the room even knew it was an issue but the person who was having it. So I think that we're seeing that because of the constant bombardment of people. But most of the health care workers that I've had the opportunity to talk to and who were working were just exhausted, just genuinely exhausted. And I don't know, I think as a society, we haven't maybe been at our best, but we're working on it, working on getting back there.
Yeah. Well, and it's not unusual too that during the crisis, people really get together, and that's when the pressure's off. You know, remember that old sign that people would on their desks that said, "I'm having a nervous breakdown. I've worked hard for it. I deserve it."
Yeah. Well, and it's just like never let a crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, oh, yeah. Well, let's work through it. So, yeah, I think that's where we are. Hopefully, we'll all be better. But I think healthcare, they're going to learn to do things differently. We're going to be far more efficient and maybe appreciative. If nothing else comes of this, maybe having more appreciation for people that are at the bedside and the hard work that people who have been doing the work that all of a sudden we notice isn't getting done, and it's so difficult. You know, all the nurses that have been there through death and dying, and it just becomes an expectation. Just being more thoughtful about it. Yeah.
And certainly the technology has, I mean, can you imagine, well, obviously we couldn't have done what we're doing now. This is the first interview I've done from my home in Greeley. I've been in Chicago. Nobody knows the difference. The background's a little different, but, you know, and telehealth, the toothpaste is out of that tube now. We've been talking about it for 20 years, and here we go.
Well, and this may solve a problem, a huge problem that the rural community has had, that they haven't been able to keep up because they didn't have the internet capacity. And they've been saying, hey, we don't have the internet capacity. And the response was, well, once you get the economy of scales and you get enough people there that it makes it affordable, we'll get the internet there. Well, guess what? Economy of scale isn't even part of that decision matrix. It's a necessity. It's a necessity that rural kids can compete and have online classes. But maybe see that before.
Yeah, it's become one of those things, you know, like education and a police force and telephone and electricity. That's just kind of a basic service that everybody is expected to have. Yeah.
Like electricity. You know, I mean, I live in an old house and it has electricity, but when that house was built, it didn't have electricity.
Yeah.
And you just think all the things that have happened during that time that house has been there, and it's like, okay, well, let's add internet with electricity because it's just so commonplace. No, very few people don't have electricity.
Yeah. So you know, we're still in the midst of this crisis, but knowing how your mind works. So what are the things? Where do you think you're going to go with CAHEC? You know, even or in the midst of this, how has this changed your visions for CAHEC?
It is going to have substantial changes. All I can tell you is not where we're going, but that we have some journeys we need to continue on. The whole way we accommodate healthcare students in private homes is such a 1980s model And while it has huge benefits that the students are placed there and they get to know the family, it's no longer attainable, I don't think. And it's also not the way that this cohort of students feel comfortable. And so I think that's a complete model that will have huge ramifications throughout all of education of healthcare workers. And how do you engage them in the community, and what does that look like? I think that's a real reality of where we need to go. And how do we deliver programs? And what is the most effective online didactics? We know it works. We know that some things we thought you could do online, things you couldn't do. I think it's broadened that. But I think we're going to find a gap, and it's going to be not necessarily educational gap. It's going to be comfort gap. And that when we deliver our programs, there's a whole group of folks that could really benefit. Seniors could benefit by doing these one-on-ones, but it's not that it's an education. They've never been exposed to it in many cases. So how do we go back and pick up that whole cohort group and give them the skill set that they need in order to move forward? I think that there's some opportunity there to look at that. And I think if we're going to be true to ourselves, we need to stop and reflect on if our goal is to create a healthcare workforce that looks like the population, we need to go back and really look and say, why is it not working? I mean, everybody knows it's not working. And we come up with all these reasons why it's not working. But I think maybe if we want to do the right thing, we should really sit back and say, is it the color of your skin? Is it education? Is it access? What is it? And to address it from that point of view, and in advocacy. I think that a lot of times we've attributed student success with students who received great education. They had all the money in the world. But I think maybe it just comes down to they also had people who believed in them. And where do we provide that for students? If you're not getting it if you don't have a helicopter mom and that's trying to moving you through the system, I think that we need to look at that. And we spend a lot of money on facilities and space in education to bring people together. And I also think if we're going to be true to our mission of educating everyone and providing concierge education, we need to ask why we have huge buildings that are just sitting there in some cases. We've proven that you can educate without it, so why do we spend all the money on that capital facility? I think that's where education needs to look at. It'll be interesting to see. Yeah. But man, it's so that's gonna take a lot of effort. It's like, I make myself tired just saying that's where I think we're gonna go. But
yeah, good. Well, I'm glad some of it is in your hands.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, we'll see. But there's always room to good things. Yeah. But I think it's the little things too. What is hard is when you go from overnight. And I think it's incrementally little things matter along the way. The big things usually you catch up with, but it's the little things in life that matter the most.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to say, Monica?
I just want to say thank you for being such a great partner and working on this project and believing in the mere fact that we can make a difference by sitting down and talking to people. And I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Monica. It's as I started out saying, it's just been a pleasure to work with you and with with CAHEC, which, like I said, I've been probably affiliated with since before you were born, just about, and to see where it's going, and you, with your guidance and your vision, I'm just thrilled. So thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for taking the time to be interviewed.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.
We're going to do great things.